We're ready.
Recording in progress. Welcome to the
Yes.
show.
Welcome. Hello,
Where the
everybody. Is this the
thoughts
scary voice?
the thoughts gather and then fleet
Mm,
right out of the skull
the
as it's
ghosts.
smashed open with a hatchet.
Yes, and gore and blood
How
spill
else will
onto the
you
driveway.
see? How else will you see man's thoughts unless you crack open his skull and peer into his brain?
Sounds yummy. I
Let's
like
get
that.
Hannibal up in here.
Yes. Ooh, Hannibal. Hannibal Lecter. Bread Dragon. Remember
Mhm.
that one?
Silence of the Lambs.
Silence. Or what does he do? He does the fava beans and then he goes,
Fava beans and a nice Chianti.
he makes like a squirrel sound, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. I was never a big fan of those movies. They're okay. I mean,
Sirens.
Silence of the Lambs is the best one, and it's only so good because it's Anthony Hopkins 10
Anthony
minutes that he's in the movie. I mean, it was so good
Hopkins
that he won an Oscar, and he's
for
literally I
that
think in the movie for like 10 or 12 minutes or something. It was like total
total.
runtime. So
Yeah, but he's so compelling. He does a
mhm.
great job. And then I think the bad guy's really good in that.
Yeah, Buffalo Bill.
Buffalo Bill. Yeah,
Mhm.
he's scary as shit.
Yeah.
And isn't it based on a real guy who used to steal people in
Oh,
vans?
probably. I feel like a lot of times whenever there's a story about a serial killer, it's usually based off of a real life serial killer, and they sort of tweak it a little bit. But
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if it's based off of something.
I think it is, but I'm not a serial killer aficionado. I used to
Okay.
really be into like serial killer stories, and you said you listened to a podcast and stuff
Mhm.
about it, and then I realized I was just like I was turning into like a weirdo. Like I was just like I'm
That's
just
all it took.
obsessed with like murder and death and like how to get away with it and all this weird shit. And I was like, I don't want to be into that. I don't want to think about that all the time.
I just find the psychology of people interesting. Like what it takes for a person to get to that point, where they
I
are
don't know.
killing people in, whatever ritualistic or non-ritualistic manner that they choose to do. But
Yeah.
because some of them they just get a lot of them, like when you listen to like the serial killer it's just called Serial Killers. It's their podcast. It's like a network of podcasts, and they do a whole bunch of different kinds of shows, but this one is just about serial killers. And then after you listen to so many of them, like for a while when I first started listening to that podcast, I was like really into it, and I was listening to them back to back, just like all like, and then after a while they all blur together. You're like, oh, all these people had like horrible childhoods, like they were typically filled with abuse, like sexual and physical and emotional, like every kind of abuse. And then it's just kind of stems from there, it seems like, from a lot of them.
Yeah.
There's very few of them that had like a nice upbringing.
Well, and they're all male, so
Yeah.
that's a common denominator.
Yeah, they were saying that typically when females are serial killers, it's usually for money. Like that's typically
Mm,
like the motive. Whereas for men, it's
power,
sexual and um
control,
control. Yeah, but for
power.
women, it's like for a specific like material thing. They said a lot of time, not all of them, but
Because
typically.
they're fucking shallow,
Yeah,
shallow ladies,
shallow ass women.
shallow ass serial killer bitches.
But how was your last couple weeks? We didn't do a show last week because you were busy with a friend and then tired, and so it just didn't happen.
It's all my fault because I was tired like a little baby.
No, I'm not judging.
No, yeah, we ended up staying up. My buddy came over from Eugene, and he we were hanging out and we were just having dinner and stuff, and then we ended up starting to watch Squid Game.
Mm,
And we just
great
kept
show.
watching it for like 6 episodes, which is like 6 hours. And it was like 2 in the morning. And we were like, I guess we'll be done now and fucking go to bed. And then and then he ended up taking off the next day, and I was just fucking super beat. So I just didn't feel like I wouldn't be very energetic in
Mm-hmm.
my conversationals. So yeah, that was cool. I was just glad to have the weekend off. I went I set up a new photography setup for macro photography, which is where you take pictures of small things and make them kind of big in the frame, like bugs and bees and but I ended up really just taking a shit ton of pictures of mushrooms because insects aren't really out when it's really cold and wet. So I didn't really see any. So I ended up just going to the park and taking a bunch of pictures of mushrooms. I took pictures, probably 20 different mushrooms. And that was pretty fun. And then I worked Monday through Friday. I closed every day. I just, 11 to 8:30 every day till.
At least you had a consistent schedule. That's nice.
Yeah, it was decent.
It always
Yesterday
sucks when you have to
was,
like
yeah.
close and then open the next morning. And I
Yeah,
used to
and
have
then
that when I
open,
worked
and then
it.
you're off, and then you
Yeah.
mid shift, and then you open, and you're like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, when I was a manager, my last retail job was at Barnes and Noble, and so it was like they didn't close till 10, and then they opened at like 8 o'clock. So your closing shift, you get out of there at 11, and then to open the next morning, you had to be back by like 7. And buckets. You're like literally, I have an 8-hour gap in between. So it's like by the time you got home, wind down, and it's like you'd sleep for like 5 or 6 hours at the most, and then have to get up and go right back to work.
Yeah,
Do
it's
not
not
miss those
good.
days.
Yeah, I think it's like a weird thing that happens when you have a certain amount of people and you are open every day. You don't have one day to like give everybody a day off. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to be on this constant rotation because everybody's like wanting a weekend off, but you don't want to give one person the weekend off every week. So you end up swapping it. So it means no one gets a regular schedule ever. And so it's just week to week you're doing different things.
Yeah.
I think it's good in that it's kind of keeps you on your toes, and it's dynamic, and it's interesting, and if you can manage your sleep you can handle it, but a lot of times it means you get less sleep, and that's not good for you long term, or for being productive.
Yeah, for me, I just I struggle a lot with like depression and stuff, and I think it was just because my schedule was always all fucked up, and I wasn't
Hmm.
getting a lot of sleep. But I'm far happier now that I work like an actual Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Like it's very helpful for me to have a very consistent schedule. It's kind of boring, like every week is kind
Hmm.
of the same. It's like I have a very set schedule throughout the
Yeah.
whole week, and the weekends I'm obviously not so restrictive. I just kind of do whatever I need to do, but
Yeah.
it's been good for my mental health, that's for sure.
Yeah,
And I
that's
don't dread
important.
the holidays as much now. Like I used to
Oh,
fucking hate the holiday season. Once like the end of October hit, like through the end of the year, just a total nightmare. I hated it so much.
yeah, that's what
Now
we're
it's like
doing
I
right
actually
now.
get the holidays off. I don't have to worry about it. I don't go shopping anywhere on like Black Friday because I'm like, dude, I used to work through this. I don't want to. I know how much it sucks for those employees, and I don't want to be out in it or contributing. So I do what every sensible American does. After I eat my Thanksgiving meal, I just get on Amazon and order all my Black Friday shit on there, and call it a night.
Yeah.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Yeah, I hate Black Friday. I think it is a mass delusion. I think
Oh,
people are
it's
out of
yeah,
their
it's
minds.
fabricate. It's people got to
Fucking
save that
hate it.
extra 20% off of their refrigerators or whatever,
I just think they don't need to
or the
be buying
TVs.
all that shit. Like, what are you
Oh,
all
it's not.
doing? Why
No,
are you
yeah,
buying all this shit? It's ridiculous. It's going to end up in a fucking um in a hole in the earth and just sit there forever. It's ridiculous. Like people just are so wasteful. And I waste plenty of stuff, but
oh yeah, we
I
all do. I
I
mean,
really try to limit the amount of stuff I just buy on a whim, like for no particular, like, I mean, I guess they're buying it for other people, but you're buying like, what do people spend like thousands of dollars on their fucking family for Christmas? So that why? Like, what is going on? I genuinely, since I didn't grow up with Christmas, it just boggles my mind that all these people do this fucking thing that I just don't. It seems so stressful and complicated
it
and
really is. And
stupid.
every year I'm always like, we should just not like we should buy only like one thing for each person. And then it's like then they buy you like or you don't want to buy anything for certain people. I'm like, hey, how about this holiday? We just all enjoy each other's company and nobody has to spend money on each other. But then all it takes is one person to buy a gift for somebody, and then it's like a domino effect. Because then that other person's like, shit, I gotta buy a gift for
I
that
know,
person
because
because they
it's,
bought something
yeah,
for me and I don't want to be a dick. And
it's
so it
guilt.
just creates this weird societal pressure. And the next thing you know, you're buying everybody in your family a present because all of them bought you like one
Yeah,
thing.
my most of my family doesn't do that. So it's very
Mm.
easy. Like my mom might go a little bit here and there and get us something little, but like we never celebrated it. So most of us in the family don't care. And so like I don't know. Maybe the kids will like. My brother has a younger kid, but he's in high school now. Like, I don't need to be buying you shit, dude. Get a job.
Yeah.
What are
Right.
you doing? I don't understand why people think that like gift giving is the way to show appreciation and family togetherness. I like Thanksgiving makes more sense, but I never get to fucking celebrate because of goddamn Black Friday, which is the next morning. And so
Yeah.
it's like pointless. It's like, I don't know. I think it's just a ridiculous setup
Yeah,
that we
I do
have
not miss it.
going
And
on.
it sucks for retail employees, that's for sure. Anything else exciting happened the last couple weeks? Some photography, some hanging out with
I finished a
friends, some
book.
work. Oh, I saw you
Um,
posted a review with
yeah, I
the
just did.
fifth
Fifth
something
season.
fifth season. That's what
And
it is.
it's really good. My review is on my website. I recommend reading my review and then never reading the book. No, it's a really good
That's all
book. I
you
was
don't need
really
to.
impressed with it. I think it's really, really good. I think you'd like it. I think I just never heard about it before, and it
Hmm.
seems to be it just had a really cool story and a setup and fantasy elements and very cool, very fun. But that is my recommendation. But I'll re-mention it at the end of the
Oh,
show
okay.
again
Excellent.
because I finished it. But and now I'm reading just a random novel I bought at Goodwill called Murder on the Iditarod Trail, and it's just like
Hmm.
a little crime whodunit mystery.
Hmm.
And I never read those kind of books, and it's a little dry and like details, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm still reading it. I'll see if I like it.
Some of those like crime mystery thriller novels, they're either like that, they're kind of dry and like very detail oriented, or they move like at a really brisk pace
Yeah,
and you can like read it in an afternoon, like no problem.
yeah,
It's just very like sort of, not to sound snooty, but like just basic writing that just gets you from point A to point B.
yeah. This one's not very basic. It's good. It has good characters.
Hmm.
It's got uh, some pretty good like descriptions and writing and poetic license, but
Hmm.
um, and I like it. It's just I don't know if I care that all these people are dying, or all this, like, I
Yeah.
don't know if I care that they catch the bad guy. It's kind of like, I don't know. It's a mystery for mystery's sake. And I'm just not that into it. I've never been that. I'm not into like crime shows and mystery shows and
Yeah, I'm not either. I
yeah,
remember watching like CSI quite a bit, like way in the
yeah,
early 2000s when that was really big. And that was more because I was just fascinated by the methods that they had
yeah.
to like solve the crimes. I didn't really
Forensics.
care about the crimes so much. It was just like,
Yeah.
oh, what forensic thing are they going to pull out of their ass this week?
Yeah. It's like Psych. Like Psych is like a mystery every episode, but it's a comedy, and so the comedy gets you through it.
Hmm.
Um, but what have you been up to? You have had a whole week off, I hear. And
It's true. Yeah.
what have you been engaging with your time?
Yeah. So I just took the week off. Vanessa ended up taking this week off a couple months ago. So I just requested the same week off because we usually try to pair up our time off together so we can do stuff. But we didn't really have any plans this week. So we just had like a little laundry list of projects we wanted to do around our house. And then I took the time. So I got that done. We did all that like Monday. We were like, we had a bunch of stuff like just the previous owner of our house left just random like yard shit there, like a bunch of scrap wood along the side of the house, like old plastic lawn chairs, like a fucked up birdhouse, just like all this random shit like outside. I think that they just forgot about it, that it was out there. Just like this random weathered junk that's just piled up. So anyway, we've been wanting to get rid of it for a while and we just never took the time to like load it all into the back of my truck and take it to a landfill. And so we finally did that. And then we were gonna do that one day, and then we've been slowly repainting the inside of our house. So we repainted the office that I'm in right now, and then the room that we're using is like a gym. We repainted those after my sister-in-law moved out because her and my nephew were living in these two rooms. So once they were emptied out, it was like the perfect time to just go ahead and repaint them before we moved stuff in. And so we did those last year, and then we've been dragging our feet to repaint our bedroom. So we did that this week as well.
Hmm.
And we were going to do that on a separate day, but we just ended up doing it Monday after we were done with the taking that stuff to the landfill. So we just kind of knocked everything out in one day.
Did you repaint to change the color or just to freshen it up?
Kind of to change the color and to freshen it up.
Hmm.
The paint that was on the walls is definitely like been around a while. It's pretty like scuffed up and from, you know, people hanging things up on the wall and just general age. And also whoever like painted the inside of the house before didn't do a very good job. There's just like random spots where it's like they missed a spot when they were painting and like the corners were all fucked up. So it's just kind of like we've been wanting to just go through and repaint anyway, just to clean it up and to change the color and make it our own. So it's nice. It's cool. We did like this dark blue that you can
Yeah.
see behind me on the video. So we did a dark blue on 3 of the walls, and then we did a dark gray accent wall. So like all the rooms are very like cool, like
Mm.
temperature wise. Like it just kind of feels nice and cooler in each room. And then
Mhm.
our bedroom, we flipped it because this blue sucks to use. Like that's 3 coats that I had to put on there, and
Mhm.
it's still a little splotchy in spots. But I just ran like I at some point when I feel ambitious, I'm gonna have to go buy more of this blue paint and try to touch it up some more until I can get it like nice and solid. So when we painted our bedroom, we flipped it and made all the 3 walls the dark gray because that went on like perfectly with no problems. And then we did the 1 accent wall in the blue because we didn't feel like we were gonna have to go buy a bunch more blue paint because of how many layers we had to put on. For whatever reason, this blue just does not go on very well. I don't know if it's just because the color that we're painting over keeps wanting to bleed through or the color that we're putting on just sucks. Who knows? But it's a bit of a hassle to deal with. So we painted our room a little differently than we originally planned just to avoid the headache of it. Um, and so that was all the fun house chores, which is all sounds very exciting, I'm sure. But then since I had the time off and I haven't been doing it for so long, I just started writing my next novel. I've been working on the notes for it for the last like month and a half or so. I've had this really cool idea that I wanted to follow. And so I've been doing notes. I've been writing like my process is I always like starting with my characters, like who is in this novel. And so I sort of always start by while the plot's kind of developing in the back of my mind, I like write biographies for all of my characters. So I just can get a sense of who each one of them are and like
Mhm.
you know, what do they fear? What do they want? What are their goals? Who are they? What's their background?
Mhm.
What do they look like? All these details. So I usually start by writing all of that out first as the plot's kind of percolating. And then usually after that, it's like a good, like I know who my characters are for the most part. Obviously, you end up like they end up changing a little bit as the story goes. Or you add a bunch of new characters that are usually like secondary characters that aren't as integral, but usually like the main characters are all plotted out for me ahead of time. Um, so I've had all that done for a little while and I just haven't pulled the trigger on starting the novel because I was trying to force myself to just take some time off because usually I start writing the next novel while the other one's being edited by
Mhm.
Vanessa because she takes a while to get through all the editing. And so during that time I get a little stir crazy and just start writing the next book. And I was trying to take more time off this time, but it's like after like a month, I'm just kind of like I'm ready to start the next project. It's such an integral part of my life at this point. It feels weird when I'm not writing. Um, and so yeah, since I had the whole week off, I was like, this will be a perfect time because I don't have to worry about work. I can sit down and really build the foundation of this new novel. Because starting them is kind of like once you get the ball rolling, it's a pretty mostly smooth process as you slowly work your way through it, but getting it like started is kind of like the hardest part almost. Is making sure you're laying that foundation down well. And so it's been going really fucking well actually this week.
Mm.
Like I've
Good.
already written I over the last 5 days, I've written like 30 pages and it's about I don't know, a little over 6,000 words at this point. And it's
Wow.
going really well. Yeah, I've just been sort of building this routine where I shut myself into my office space and then I put my headphones on and I just listen to a soundtrack to like a movie or a game that's like fitting the mood of the chapter. And so I can't like with these headphones, they're actually the headphones I'm wearing right now. I can't hear anything else. So it's like all I hear is this music creating this sort of ambiance in my mind. And then I just am focused on the story.
Mm.
And so with the door closed, there's just no distractions. All I hear is the music. And so it's been working really well with keeping me focused. Um, And then I just make sure that I don't open the internet tab on my laptop unless it's to look something up for the novel. Like I force myself to not, because it's so easy to just
Yeah.
click on it and be like, oh, I'm going to check
Do something
Twitter
for a
real
second.
fast or
Yeah.
something. And then half hour later, you haven't gotten anything written because you're just fucking around and procrastinating.
Yeah.
So I don't let myself open an internet tab unless it's to look something up for the novel. Once I look up what I'm looking for, I close it and then I go back to writing. And I just refuse to kind of let myself deviate from that. But it's cool. It's going to be an interesting novel. It's very I'm experimenting a lot with it. It's written kind of more like an old English style story where it's all written in kind of like simple declarative sentences, and there's almost no punctuation in it.
Mm,
It's just periods and commas. I'm not using quotation marks,
mm,
semicolon, like I'm trying to just clear all that shit out and just create a very straightforward, basic style of writing that just tells the story.
mhm.
So it's been fun to experiment with. And I've even like each paragraph after I write it, I've been going back and rereading it and then like adjusting it to simplify it more than how I wrote. Because it's very easy when you're writing to just add all these extra
Mhm.
adjectives and like all this stuff to it
Yeah.
to make it all frilly. But I'm trying to like get rid of some of it. Like some of it's still there because you want it to paint the picture for the reader. But at the same time, I'm like, what do I not need? Like what's really needed to get this across? And so I've been
Sure.
trying to find a way as I read the paragraph and I try to cut some stuff out of it and then
Mhm.
just make it very concise. Um, so it's just been an interesting project so far, just because I'm sort of challenging myself to write a different way, um, and a more simple way. But because of the plot revolves around like a north it's they just it's I'm not trying not to be very specific with it because I don't want it to be tied to any specific culture or tribe or anything. It's just called they're just a northern tribe that's very like Scandinavian, Viking, if you will, Norse, or whatever label you want to throw on it. It's like it's very much based off of that, but I'm trying not to pull in at first I started doing exhaustive research about like Norse history and Scandinavian culture, and like I was taking all these notes, and then I was like, if I get too bogged down in trying to really capture every little bit of this culture, it's gonna like distract me from telling the story because I feel like I'm gonna start writing a fucking history paper on this culture. And so I was like, I just need to take the ideas that this culture uses and then just blend it into the story to create kind of my own fictional tribe of nomadic warriors, I guess. So it's been interesting. I've been enjoying it.
Nice. Back to the music. Can you give me an example of something that you were listening to? And is it instrumental or does it have lyrics? Because lyrics seem like that would ruin it.
It's all instrumental.
Yeah.
Lyrics are too distracting for
Yeah, you
me.
can't listen to words.
And so actually what I've been listening to a lot, it just because it literally captures the tone perfectly of what's of the novel and definitely what's going on in the novel right now is the soundtrack to the video game A Plague Tale Innocence. Um,
Yeah, I have no idea.
yeah, fantastic game. It's on the PlayStation and Xbox, PC, all that. Anyway, it came out like a few years ago, and it's about brother and sister in France during the plague, like trying to escape and deal
Mm,
with an inquisition and all this stuff. Fucking phenomenal game. It's one of my favorite games from like probably the last few years. And the soundtrack to that game is fucking perfect. It's so good. It's beautiful, but like very melancholy. And then there's like some tracks on there that are just like seeping with dread. Like you can tell that
mm.
just something horrible is happening while this song is playing. And so it just fits the atmosphere like perfectly. So it's like almost all I've been listening to this week while I've been writing the novel because it just so perfectly encapsulates what's going on. Because the beginning of the novel, this tribe of warriors, which are the main characters, are suffering from a plague, and so it's diminishing their numbers. While at the same time, they're on the run from Christians that are basically stamping out their culture and taking over their land.
Mm.
Um, so it's basically this dying tribe of warriors who are suffering from the plague, from just being murdered by this encroaching force. And then the novel starts with them literally on the shore of their land, at an impasse. Like there's very few of them left. A lot of them are dying from plague in their tents, and they're trying to decide what they're going to do because they can't stay where they are any longer.
Hmm.
And so that's how like the novel opens, is like they're literally kind of at the end of their rope on the shore. Yeah,
Hmm.
pretty good.
Kind of reminds me of Valhalla with that was it Madsen?
Oh yeah, Valhalla Rising, totally an
Valhalla
inspiration
Rising.
for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
That was a great
yeah, I'm definitely
movie.
taking inspirations from that, from like the 13th Warrior, and
Yeah,
from I guess a Plague Tale Innocence in some regards too. But
sure. Plagues,
mhm.
viruses. Oh, speaking of viruses, did you see my shirt?
Yeah, I did.
It says
Corona
Corona,
virus.
and
What
then
does
it
it say on the
says
bottom?
Ixtapa Zihuatanejo, Mexico. Joey got me this shirt when he was in
Oh, okay.
Mexico. And
Oh,
then
very nice.
I was gonna bring it on my trip to Hawaii, but I didn't want to go through airports with something that said virus on it.
It's
So I
probably for
did
the
not
best.
wear it. But I'm wearing it today. And today is our Halloween chat
Mm-hmm.
Chatzaganza.
Chat. It's a chatter day on a
Chatter
Saturday.
day. It is chatter time. And we're going to chat about our favorite horror genre media, books, movies, games, and television. And Channing is going to be our resident expert in the area because he knows way more and actually cares about horror. And
Oh,
I
I
get,
fuck. It's like
I
my favorite genre.
it's my least favorite
Period.
genre.
Yeah.
It
This is
literally
so.
is my least favorite
When you
genre.
said that you wanted to have it, I was like, I'm not even gonna research it because like I
I know,
wouldn't.
right? You
It's
don't
too
even need
hard.
to
It's too difficult for me to try to like
write stuff down.
really parse down like my like you could literally have a whole podcast. Well, there are podcasts just all
Oh
about
yeah,
horror
right.
because there's
Every
so
time.
much of it, and especially when you're talking movies, television, books,
Yeah.
video games, like it fucking horror is
Well, how's about we do
everywhere.
this then so that we can be restrained in some capacity, or maybe I can help you, or you can educate me. Maybe is I'll go through my list, which is
Mm-hmm.
very short, and then we'll go from there, and you can kind of tell me what you think of those movies, if there's anything that's maybe better or worse,
Mm-hmm.
and or what's like similar, and then if that sparks certain favorites of yours, we can go through that, as
I'm
opposed
so
to
glad that this is your idea because this is what I was thinking when we were talking about doing this. I was like, do I want to start making a list? I was like, I kind of just want to hear what Joe has to say and then sort
sure.
of just play off of that because I have things that are like standouts to me. I was trying to
Hmm.
think of it through the lens
Standouts, sure.
of horror that like stands out to me in like maybe a nostalgic sense because there's certain like movies in particular that terrified me as a kid and have like left a mark on me ever since because
Yes,
it was like
me
the
too.
first time I felt like genuinely afraid of like some sort of media.
Sure.
So
Let's
it'll be
start,
organic.
and
We'll
let's
just
start
see.
with what is your what makes something a horror genre film? And try not to be we'll try not to be too elaborate because obviously you could go and talk about that exclusively, but what does it have to be scary emotionally? Does it have to be more gruesome as in violent? Is because violence in general is a fairly scary concept to watch or to allude to. What is it? What makes something in that genre? What makes it in that horror genre to you?
That's tough because like I think there just has to be a certain level of sort of like foreboding in the story, along with like an element of the unknown. And so, like what separates a horror movie, for example, from like a mystery film is
Or
usually like
suspense?
they both have this sense of unknown, the who done it, like what's going on. But I think with horror, it would lean more into like a darker, more violent side of it. Like Seven, that movie, for example, I would consider that not only is it like a mystery thriller, but I would consider that a horror film because
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
how dark and depraved the murders are in that. Like it's pretty scary. Whereas I think if like if the crime scenes and the method of killing in Seven were more restrained, you could almost pass it off as more of a crime thriller or a mystery thriller. So I feel like sometimes with like horror, it plays off of other genres, but then sort of takes it that extra step, whether it's more violence, maybe a darker story. Because there, even when you compare like horror to action films, like all action films have a lot of violence, right? Which violence is scary. Um, but I think, and there are some movies, there's actually some action movies that are so violent that when I read about them, people actually consider them horror.
Hmm.
Have you ever seen the film? It's a Korean film called I Saw the Devil.
No,
You should watch it.
I don't think so.
Fantastic movie. I think it's streaming right now. But anyway, that's considered a horror movie. But when you're actually watching the movie, it's actually a revenge tale. The movie is about this Korean, I think he's a police officer or some special operative in the Korean government. And his wife is killed by this serial killer that they've been tracking. And then the rest of the movie, that happens at the beginning of the film. The rest of the movie is him exacting revenge on the serial killer by fucking with him in horrifying ways
Oh,
and then
wow.
letting him go. Like he captures the serial killer, does something fucked up to him, and then lets him go and then tracks him down again. Like
Oh,
he's just,
wow. He's just a
and it's such
badass.
a
Yeah.
kind of an agonizing revenge story that you realize that it's very horrifying,
Yeah.
actually. And it kind of scary because of like the depravity that's on display. You should definitely watch it. I finally watched it a couple of years ago, and
Yeah.
it's an incredible movie. Like one of the best revenge films you could ever see about just like the depths that someone will go to enact their revenge on somebody. Um, but so it's like I think for horror, like horror, I think can sometimes be very simple, like haunted stuff, slashers. I mean,
Hmm.
some of these are just like you see them and you just know that it's horror. But as time has gone on and people have really evolved what horror stories can be, um, I I mean, you look at like Midsummer. It's about a cult, but the whole thing takes place in this beautiful land. It's
Hmm.
sunny, it's bright, it's colorful. Because I was gonna say a lot of times horror is usually dark. It takes place at night. It's
Yeah.
dark. It's
Aesthetics.
violent. Right, but Midsummer also belies that. There's suddenly like moments of punctuated violence in that movie that kind of almost out of nowhere and is almost shocking. Um, but for me, I think horror what scares me the most in anything horror is just the element of the unknown. When you don't know what the creature is, what the ghost wants, who's killing these people, like it's pretty scary when you don't know. But then the moment typically that it becomes defined is when the horror element sort of gets diminished for me. The moment that you find out that who the ghost was when they were alive, why
Hmm.
they died, what they
Hmm.
want. Once you see the creature lurking in the dark and your imagination's no longer sort of filling in what you think it could be, it sort of becomes diminished. So I feel
Hmm.
like horror generally, it's a dark, foreboding sense of storytelling with like a really um, great tinge of the unknown. Because I
Okay.
mean, that's what I think in general, that's what people fear. You fear what you don't know because your imagination is, it's like you're almost your own nemesis. It really can make things far more terrifying than they really are.
Yeah, I think unknown is definitely a huge part of it, but there is a difference between suspense and horror. And I think the difference is, and I think we can designate a horror film or horror genre item as anything that is designed to elicit fear. So it can be essentially anything, but suspense is not necessarily going to give the audience fear, but it might be giving one of the characters fear. And that may not be considered a horror, but when it gives the audience a sense of fear, that's when it becomes horror. Potentially. I was thinking about the movie Bone Tomahawk
Mm-hmm.
because it has a lot of horror elements, but it's not like I mean, it's not scary until kind of the end. And but it has like that kind of supernatural enemy. You're up against something that is so much more powerful than you and ancient and barbaric, which I think is part of what a lot of horror is, which is like the old world meeting the new world,
Mm-hmm.
or the dead meeting the living. It's kind of to like being placed in a position where you're forced to deal with monsters, and monsters are metaphorical for the unknown, things that can kill you, literal monsters like animals that can kill you. So I think that kind of helps define horror, although it's a very broad genre.
Well, in
And
the example of like Bone Tomahawk, like I consider that a horror movie, but I consider it like a horror western. It's not like quite a horror movie, but
it's more of a
it's
Western.
also not quite like a full-blown western. It's like definitely
Mhm.
pulling in elements from both and sort of making it its own thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would consider, I mean, if people were like, oh, would you put that in the horror category? I was like, yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, if you were like at a, you know, a Blockbuster, the one left in the world, and they're trying to figure out what section to put it in, I guess it would just depend on what
Yeah.
sections are available.
It's like degree, you know, like
Mhm.
matters of degree, like Old Boy is not as much a horror as it is kind of a thriller,
Mhm.
but it's got some horror elements to it, and it's got like, especially at the beginning when he's stuck in that uh prison, that weird apartment prison that they just took
Mhm.
him out of the world and
But
didn't.
see, I feel like the horror from that stems because you don't know what's going on, right?
Of course, but
It's
that's,
that
yeah,
unknown factor. And
of
it's less
course.
scary later once you find out, like, oh, once the whole plan's revealed, and it's like
Yeah.
then the horror is like taken out of it. You're like, oh, you
Well,
know,
then
he
it's
was,
more like disgust and
mhm.
like anger.
Yeah.
But fear leads to anger, and anger leads to pain.
Mhm.
Um, and pain leads to the dark side. I don't know the
It's
exact same.
fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate. You're on the
Hate.
right track.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was getting there.
Hate, pain. Yeah.
I think it's like hate. It's like internal pain. It's like
Mhm.
personal, like
Yeah. You gotta have some pain towards
psychotic
some,
pain.
like you have to feel pain from someone to hate them, I feel like. Because usually they would have had to have wronged you in some
Well,
terrible way and caused you pain in order for you to hate
yeah,
them.
like that level of anger is really like tenses your body and makes you it can cause actual physical pain. Okay, let's start with some video games that I like that are horror, which are not going to be very many because I'm
Mhm.
not into the traditional horror movies, or sorry, video games like Resident Evil. I'm just not into Resident Evil. I'm not into
Mhm.
Silent Hill. I'm not into the one where they have the camera and they're fucking taking pictures of
Oh, Fatal
ghosts.
Frame.
Fatal Frame. I don't
You're
know.
just like I love all of these.
I know they're
All
not.
yeah.
I'm just not into them. I don't know necessarily why, because video games are different than movies and stuff. But I guess I'm just not. It just doesn't do anything for me to like try to like um go around a creepy house that's dark and kill things.
Mhm.
But one of my favorite video games that I think is definitely a horror and physically scared me was Dead Space
Oh yeah,
one.
definitely.
Because at first I had no idea what I was getting into, and then you start to fight these creatures and they come out of nowhere,
Necromorphs.
and the
Yeah.
the audio experience is perfect, and the lighting in the game is really fucking perfect. Like they'll just like cut the lights every once in a while and shit'll happen.
Mhm.
And because you have these weird weapons that you can't rely on very well, so you kind of don't know if you're going to make it through the next area. So there was a real sense of uh like obviously unknown, but like I don't even know if the game is going to let me win. Like it's hard to
Mhm.
tell what's going to happen next. So I think Dead Space, even 2 wasn't as scary. 2 was a little bit more story driven and a little more like I knew what to expect, and
Well,
the weapons
it's
made it
because that,
easier,
you know, that
or
unknown factor
powers.
was taken out because
Yeah,
the first Dead Space terrified, like not terrified, but it was like
yeah,
one of
it
the
was
last games that I played that I remember being
jumpy.
like, fuck.
Yeah,
Because you didn't know what you just, you know, you land on the Ishimura, you don't know what the hell's going on. You don't know what those creatures are at first. Like,
yeah, it's
but yeah,
very fun. It was a
yeah, but
fun
then come
game.
Dead Space 2, you're like, yeah, I already kind of know. So you were
Yeah,
in it more for the story at that point. You're like, oh, what's going to happen next? Are we going to
yeah,
learn more about the origins of why these creatures are showing up? Like, yeah, as Dead Space went, it became, and then Dead Space
more
3, which
action
was
oriented.
still entertaining, but then that one was co-op, so like it's less scary when you have a friend with you, kind of a thing. So
Yeah. Yeah, I just didn't
um,
even get into Dead Space 3. I think I got it and I started playing it and I was like, I don't get I didn't play it with another person, and
Mhm.
the single player experience wasn't very good to me,
Yeah,
so I
it's
just
far
stopped
better
playing it.
with another person. I mean, you can play through the whole thing obviously by yourself, but the
Yeah,
game, it was like designed to be played with like for two people
yeah.
to play together, and so it's definitely
I think there was a
diminished.
part where I was just going through the snow trying to get to a door, and I was like, this is dumb. I don't want to just be like struggling through the
Yeah.
murky snow. Like
I
that
love the
wasn't
beginning of
scary.
that game when you're in space because that was the first one where you could actually go out into space and you had to like sort of boost to
Float.
like different abandoned ships and stuff. But then yeah,
Mhm.
once you land on the planet, that's kind of the weaker part of the game, I
Yeah.
think.
So then the next video game I have on my list is Bloodborne, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
horror for multiple reasons, but mostly for the aesthetics. It's
Oh
not
yeah, it's gothic
this.
horror
It's not
for sure.
scary. It's Dark Souls game. I know what I'm getting into. Dark Souls. It's a fucking difficult ass game, and it's really fun because they changed up the mechanics for Bloodborne. But just the horror gothic blood is like the main
Your blood bucks that you spend to
yeah, blood
make yourself
bucks and bloods
stronger.
everywhere, and blood tinge and the blood magic, and all the Cthulhu references. And I know Cthulhu and uh who made Cthulhu? Sorry,
HP Lovecraft.
HP Lovecraftian
Mhm.
stuff. So that's all very horror driven, but it's more like sci-fi, supernatural um, stuff. But I consider it a horror. I think it's definitely a Dark Souls game, but it's a horror aesthetic.
I
Um,
consider not only Bloodborne but all the Souls games to be horror
oh,
games
really?
because,
Because they're
well, like
dark.
so when I was playing through Demon Souls on PS5 last year when it came out, I was like, I was actually thinking about it in that lens. I was like, this is actually like scarier than most like games sold as horror games because there are certain like there's a whole well, it depends on what levels. There's a level, it's the third world, it's the Tower of Latria, which I know you're not as familiar with Demon Souls as like the other
No, I'm
Souls
not.
games, but that whole set of levels takes place in like this dark prison, and it is like the most unrelenting, like oppressive atmosphere in a game. And there's just so much tension because you're dealing with the mind flayers, which are like their prison wardens, the dudes with the octopus heads that shoot fucking magic at you. And
Yeah.
um but there's so much. And then the fifth world in that game is all takes place in this swamp. It's so dark you can't see that far, and you can't wander out into the swamp for too long because you get poisoned by the swamp water. But anyway, like all the Souls games have like certain areas that are just so dark, and there's so much tension because you know how easily you can just be obliterated in that game. And I think that the Souls games use that tension well, and I think that's part of what makes them so scary for people is just knowing how easy you can die. Like, and
Sure.
then you're wandering in these like dark dungeons with fucking all kinds of crazy creatures, and you sometimes, and like when you run into them for the first time you don't always know how to fight them.
Yeah.
And so it's
You
like
think you're
usually you
supposed
just
to, and
mm-hmm.
so you try, and then you die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a tension in those games that I feel
Hmm.
that I don't feel even when I'm playing games that are like meant to be horror experiences. And I think it's just because part of it's the difficulty, part of it's the atmosphere, the creature design. But
Yeah.
I think Bloodborne in particular is probably the most like created to be like a horror game,
Yeah.
just from like the visuals and the atmosphere and everything. Whereas the Souls games, there's areas that aren't scary at all, and then but then there's like some areas where you're
Yeah.
like, I hate this fucking place and I don't
Yeah.
want to go down there.
I think part of those games is also getting lost. Like you
Mm-hmm.
legit get lost in them because there's no map, and and they have mazes and puzzles and doors that you're like, why isn't this door opening? And you have things chasing you. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's definitely like, uh, because of its design, very, very thrilling to
Uh-huh.
play. Like it creates a lot of frustration and emotional reaction. I think I wrote a blog that was kind of just about how Dark Souls kind of changed the way I approach problem solving, because you have to you have to go through enough of that frustration to like realize that it's okay to like die in the game, and
Mhm.
that you need to be patient and try to understand the circumstances and learn. And yeah, it's a very it's not your typical gaming experience. But this is not a podcast about Dark Souls.
I know.
So
It's a
but
rabbit
yeah,
hole you could go down very easily. I
so
understand.
those are my video game ones. I'm sure there's other ones that I could put in that category that I've played, but I can't think of them off the top of my head that they're like horror and they're like sticking out to me. There are those classics like Resident Evil and stuff, but I mean,
I was gonna
those are,
say, I think
I mean, kind of
like,
everybody knows about that.
yeah, as I say, like, I think for me, like the essential horror games would be the original Resident Evil. Actually, the remake of the original that's probably like one of the best. Because Resident Evil is a franchise like Dead Space. The more they went, they just went down the action route more and
Yeah,
more.
yeah.
And then when they did the Resident Evil 2 and 2 remake was actually kind of went back to being more of a horror experience while also maintaining like the improved gameplay that the action entries added in. But like there's something about the remake of the original Resident Evil. It came out on GameCube first, and then now it's like on all the consoles. That's like just perfect, like survival horror. And then the original Silent Hill is good, but it's really Silent Hill 2 is like the standout that I like when I when I meet somebody who hasn't played Silent Hill 2, I'm like, you should try to play it. Even like that game, because that was when like so Resident Evil relied more on like the traditional kind of jump scare stuff. Like everybody knows the scene from the original Resident Evil when you're running down the hall and the dog suddenly bursts through the window. That terrified like everybody that didn't know that that was going to happen when they first played that game. Um, and so, but Silent Hill never really, especially two, there's no jump scares in Silent Hill 2. It's all psychological. Like you can and that's why that game is always on like the best, like always in like the top greatest horror games of all time, because Silent Hill 2 was like way ahead of its time in its look at the psychological damage that disease can have on a marriage, and like feelings of infidelity, and like all these different themes are tied into it. And like the deeper you go into it and the more you think about it, you start realizing that all the creatures in the game are designed based off of these psychological ideas. um and there's just great moments in that game. Like one of the greatest ones is like you go into a prison cell at one point, and there's somebody who wrote on the wall that and the writing is like there used to be a hole here, and you're just like, what the fuck does that mean? And
Hmm.
then there's moments, it's just really interesting horror. Like I remember when I played it when I was younger, when it first came out on the PS2, which was like 2001. I didn't find it scary at all. Like there were moments when you're like wandering around in the dark and there's monsters, that they're that basic sense of fear. But then as you get older and you really start paying attention to what the game's trying to tell you thematically, it's a lot scarier.
Hmm.
But it's not like the jump tense scares. It's like it just sort of gets into your head and sort of lives there. So Silent Hill 2 for sure. I mean, but Silent Hill in general is a pretty solid choice. But I mean, if you're only going to play one, then 2 is the one to play. And the nice
Hmm.
thing about 2 is it's a standalone game. You don't need to have played any other Silent Hill games. It's its own individual story, so it's not really tied to anything else outside of just some Easter eggs that tie it to other stuff. But and
Nice.
then you already mentioned the original Dead Space, which I think is a central horror. And then I one that's a little bit more recent is a game called Outlast 2, which is I'm actually trying to get Vanessa's playing the first Outlast right now, and I'm trying to get her to play Outlast 2 right after that. But that game is all about a husband and wife who are going to film like a documentary about these girls that went missing in like this desert in the US. And basically the whole game is about you uncovering this cult out in the fucking desert.
Hmm.
And it's a terrifying game. Like it's a game where you're defenseless, so you have to run and hide from anybody that's chasing you. And then kind of as the story unfolds, it just like goes places. Like really, it like takes the ball and runs with it out into
Hmm.
crazy town. So um, that's a really good one. And then just to keep the conversation moving, the last one I would mention is the original Bioshock, which some people I don't think
Hmm.
consider horror, but I think it is. I mean, it's much more action heavy, and there's a like RPG elements to it, but the when you kind of like realize that the story revolves around you wandering through a failed dystopian underwater city filled with people who are spliced out of their minds because they've been using these DNA altering drugs and now they're like
Mhm.
mutated, deformed, and crazy. It's like the perfect recipe for a horror story is wandering through like an underwater decaying environment filled with crazy deformed people.
Mm.
Sounds like a horror story to me.
Yeah.
um and then there are moments in that game, especially the first time I played it, where I felt like kind of uncomfortable playing it, where you almost have to take a break for a second because you're just like, God, I'm like just wandering through this like fucking dilapidated place, and all these people are trying to kill me, and they're shouting random Bible verses and all kinds of
Yeah.
other nonsense. And so, um,
Yeah.
that's
It's almost like a separate horror genre, which would be like religious horror, like
which is like the
Midsummer or whatever. It's like culty kind of. It's like a different kind of thing.
and that kind of horror. Religious horror is probably almost like is like the de facto probably scariest horror to me. And I think it's because it's so easy for it to be real. Because
Mm.
religion
Is
is
scary.
obviously is a scary thing in the real world, even when it's
Yeah.
not, having people drink cyanide Kool-Aid. There's something about the ability to just almost brainwash and control large groups of people into doing what you want them to do. And that's a very scary thing to me. So anytime there's a religious horror, which I think is part of the reason why like Outlast 2, for example, is so enjoyable for me, is because it's all about dealing with a cult basically. So like cult
Hmm.
stuff is
Yeah.
terrifying.
Groups of people with um, ill intent are very
Mhm.
scary,
Yeah.
and especially against one. So let's move on to another media type. Let's go to books, because I mean there's probably obviously a
Oh
billion
yeah.
horror books, but I haven't read most of them,
Hmm.
and I'm not that into reading horror. So I'm going to just offer two that I think are in my list for horror books. The first one is Tender as the Flesh. It's
Oh
not
yeah.
horror in the way that it would be like it doesn't have as much unknown, really. I mean, there's kind of like a hope for the end that doesn't necessarily come true that I thought might happen. There's not as much of a resolution as I would want, but you really kind of know what's going on right away. But that knowledge is fucking terrifying
Hmm.
and viscerally um, kind of relatable, and in its relatability it feels really really gross and scary, and like almost kind of, I guess I could add kind of the road in that way, in that it's not that everything is so like unknown, it's the um lack of hope. There's just
Oh
so
yeah.
little to do about it, and everything is just the way it is, and you have to live with it, and you know that it, like, you don't accept it, like you accept it but you wish it were different. Like
Hmm.
if the character just was like born there and didn't care, it wouldn't matter, but because they knew a different world, they long for it, but there's no way to get there. And I think that level of dread and hopelessness is a kind of horrible thing to contemplate. I guess that's more depression than horror, but it is a kind of fear
But I
to
think it's
read through.
that sense of like hopelessness. The road's a
Yeah.
great example because like the whole time
Yeah.
you're reading out, you're like, there's like no goodness left. Like there's
Yeah.
no bright light at the end of their future because there's not some like medical facility or some,
Yeah.
a
Some
great underground
outpost.
bunker
Yeah.
where a whole
Yeah.
civilization exists. Now it's like, no, the world's fucking dying. Like
Yeah.
humanity is basically in its death throes right now. There's
Yeah.
nothing left. Like
Yeah.
you can barely get by. You're breathing ash every day. You don't see this fucking sun anymore. Like it's
Yeah.
just, yeah, like it definitely is an element of horror. And
Yeah.
it's almost like an exhausting horror. Like you're reading it and you have to like take a break because you're just like, fuck, this
Yeah.
is like draining me emotionally because
Yeah.
I can't imagine trying to wake up every day and live this life. But
Yes. The other book that I would say is one of my other horror books that I enjoyed is Anathema, which is
oh,
your book.
thanks.
It really is a horror book. It's pretty scary. It's got supernatural elements. It's got a pretty scary end boss, and I think it's definitely in that genre. Obviously, and since I don't go out of my way to read horror, but I make sure to go out of my way to read your books, I'm glad I read
Thank you.
it and it was enjoyable. And it was different enough that I kind of didn't know what to expect. So that would be another book in my horror list, but that's all I could come up with.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that whole book was like my love letter to horror. Like I pulled
Yeah.
in elements from all my favorite horror stories, or at least most of them, to like create that story. And so there's definitely elements of the cult horror and then the kind of supernatural unknown entities and all that fun stuff.
Titties.
But for me, yeah, I mean, horror novels I read all the time. Like I actually have to take
Hmm.
breaks from reading horror to like force myself to read other genres, because there's just something about, I think the thing I love about horror novels so much is not only is there it's supposed to be scary, but they usually touch on other themes that I really enjoy, you know, like loss and um you know, family dynamics and mental illness and like all these, there's like all these other things that sort of get mixed in under the horror coding. So it's like, even if you're like when I talk to people who only read horror novels, it's like I understand that, because it's not like every horror book you're reading is Friday the 13th or something. Then I could understand people being like, well, are you going to read something else? But horror encompasses like so many other things, like thematically, that it's like the one of the coolest genres that you can actually really delve into. But like I think the horror novels that really stand out to me, which two of them come from Stephen King, who's, you know, like the obviously the godfather of the horror novels at this point. And that's Pet Cemetery
Mm,
and The Shining. Those are
mm,
two of like those are my two favorite Stephen King books. And I think they're two of the greatest horror novels ever written. You know, Pet Cemetery is probably one of the darkest stories you can read. But you want to talk about hopelessness. Like nothing good really happens in that story. Um, and a lot of that stems from the fact that characters can't accept the events that have happened to them, and so they defy, I guess, fate, if you will, instead of accepting it, and then it just makes things worse and worse as the story goes. And then The Shining is just like a great, not only is it a great look at somebody struggling with alcoholism, and but it's just a fun haunted house story. You know, like
hmm.
they're staying at the, I mean, everybody probably knows what The Shining's about. And what's interesting is you get two different versions of The Shining, right? Because you have the novel, and then if you read the watch the Stanley Kubrick film, which
Hmm.
Stephen King notoriously hates because he does
Hmm.
not like the way that Stanley Kubrick interpreted
Jesus. There
the
you go,
novel.
novelist.
um what's cool is like you basically like the basic plot of the movie and the book are the same, but they are definitely interpreted very differently. Like the book, in my opinion, is far more of a supernatural story, whereas the movie's more about a guy who is kind of already a little unhinged
Hmm.
and then just gets crazier as he's isolated with his family.
Hmm.
And obviously there's like a supernatural element to the movie, but I feel like the movie's more focused on him just going crazy, whereas the book is, it's a lot more about a man's, like in the book, the main character, Jack Torrance, he's not like Jack Nicholson's interpretation. He's not like a kind of a dick already to his family. Like he's a genuinely like a good guy with an alcohol problem that turns him into a monster. And so he's like struggling with that and trying to deal with staying sober.
Hmm.
But then at the same time, he's dealing, you know, with a haunted fucking hotel that gets into his skin, and he almost becomes more possessed in the novel than he does go crazy. Like
Mm.
you almost start to understand that he's not really in control of his own actions in the novel because he's being possessed essentially.
Oh.
um
Yeah, the movie makes it seem like it's all in his head. That's how
yeah.
I interpreted it. There
Hmm.
was no haunting. He just um he just went crazy because he's drinking and isolated and went nuts. I
Yeah.
mean, there was no necessarily like there wasn't a link of realism that told you that something that was in his head actually happened,
Mhm.
that I can remember.
Well, I mean, it's real in the movie in that like Danny can see the ghosts and stuff too, because that's a big thing in Stephen King's work is that children
Oh yeah,
typically
the
are able
kid
to
does see
commune
it
with the
down the
dead and
hallway and stuff
mhm.
like that. Okay, never mind. You're right. There is a connection there in the real world. Yeah.
But like in the movie, he just like I said, he's already kind of a dick to his family in the beginning. So it's
When
like
he like
it
forces him to stay there and stuff.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so it doesn't seem like it would take much for to push him over the edge. Whereas in the
Yeah.
novel, he's a much more sympathetic character. And then you sort of know how the novel is going to go, but you're still rooting for it to be different. Like you're
Yeah.
hoping that he'll not
Hmm.
fall down this path. Whereas in the movie, you're just like, it's Jack Nicholson. He already hates his family. You can just
Yeah.
fucking see it in every scene. This is just a matter of time. Even if they weren't staying in a hotel, he's probably going to lose it at some point with his family.
Yeah, and he's such a unhinged person, like
Mhm.
character actor.
Yeah.
All of his characters seem to be unhinged anyway.
Well, and that was one of Stephen King's big complaints was that he didn't like that casting
Bad
choice because
cast.
he
Yeah.
was like, when Jack Nicholson's already has like a reputation for being an extreme character actor in some regards. So, and then there's so many horror novels to call out. So those two for Stephen King for sure. And then Richard Matheson, he is one of my favorite writers of all time. And he wrote I Am Legend, which is a
Oh,
fantastic
yeah.
like scientific
Duh.
horror novel. Like it's a horror novel, but not really scary so much as it is fascinating and trying to like there's
Yeah.
a sense of hopelessness in it because he's the last man that he knows of in the world dealing
Yeah.
with vampires every day by himself, locking
Hmm.
himself in his fortified house every night while the vampires try to seduce him outside and are
Yeah.
calling out to him
Yeah.
and then so fantastic novel. It's also a nice quick read. It's like 130 pages,
Yeah.
and
It's a
there's so
great
much that
book.
happens in that amount of time. It's a
Yeah.
very well paced novel.
I think there almost should be a different genre for that kind of book. It's almost like The Road too,
Mhm,
where although I Am Legend is more action oriented, like he does stuff as
mhm.
opposed to just walking. But it's not horror in that you're like, I don't know. I wasn't scared during I Am Legend. I was excited to like see what he was going to do and how he was going to get out of it, even if I
Mhm.
didn't know if he could. But there is a kind of one against all system in that and the road and stuff.
Well, he's dealing with
Um,
vampires too, which are like a
that's an
cult
aesthetic. Yeah,
horror figure,
they kind of have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And then he also wrote I mean, he wrote a lot of horror novels, but I Am Legend, and then he wrote a book called The Stir of Echoes, which is a really great
Yeah, didn't
ghost
they make a
story.
movie about that?
Yeah, the Kevin Bacon
It's like
film from
Kevin
the
Bacon. Yeah,
90s. Yeah. Which I watched the movie first, and the movie's great. It's a great
yeah,
90s horror film, kind of in the vein of like The Sixth Sense, when like there was kind of like a cool heyday for horror in the 90s.
yeah,
That sort of like were actually considered good movies to the general public instead of just horror aficionados.
yeah.
But the book Stir of Echoes is obviously a similar plot to the movie, but it takes place in I think like the 60s or something. So there's
Mm.
some differences there, but it's a great like haunted house type of story where like the ghost is scary, but you realize it's actually not the bad guy. Like it's a ghost trying to give a message, trying to help solve her own death. But she presented in such a scary way that it's scary at first. Um, and then just to burn. Other than that, I mean, if I'm just trying to hit on like the big ones, anything by Nick Cutter, he's
Hmm.
written like four, or he's actually technically written five horror novels, but one of them is Audible only for some reason. It's actually not in book form. But his horror is like the very dark, gory body horror type of stuff. So
Hmm.
it's like for a very particular crowd. It's not for people with a weak stomach. Like one novel, The Troop, is all about this Boy Scout troop on an island where this like mutated parasitic tapeworm is infecting people. So there's just a ton of really gross tapewormy body horror involved in that novel. But it's a great novel. It's just you
Yeah.
gotta be ready for that gruesomeness. Yeah, and then my other favorite one that he wrote is called The Acolyte, which is very similar to Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451,
Mm,
where it's like a dystopian world, but in this world, Christianity has completely taken over. There's no longer a separation of church and state. It's all the church. They
mm,
oversee everything. And the main character is what they call an acolyte, who is basically like a police officer for the church. And they exterminate anybody with different religious beliefs. They burn any memorabilia that belong to other religions, like anything that's against Christianity or defies Christian thinking or beliefs has to be basically exterminated. And like the novel opens with him talking about his youngest memory being that of when he was on a school bus watching these people burn a mentally impaired Muslim man alive, like outside
mm.
of a school bus full of children. So it's a very dark
Yeah,
novel
that's horror,
about
bro.
like when church, like when a religion actually completely takes over and
Yeah.
has all authority.
I think that's what The
Um,
Handmaid's Tale is about.
yeah, kind of similar. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I would say it's even darker. I mean, Handmaid's Tale is dark, but this
No,
is darker in that
yeah,
it's
I mean,
a far more violent take on it. But it's totally worth reading. I think you would enjoy it because it's like a horror novel, but it's just a very scary look at like religion taking over the world,
mm,
basically. And then my last one that I'll just throw out real quick, and then we can move on to um,
okay.
different media is the Terror by Dan Simmons, which is a great historical horror novel that is based off of the actual Arctic expedition. I can't think of any of the names, but it's that was a novel that it took me a couple times to actually get through it because it's very long. And it's a little dry in the beginning, but then once it gets going, it's very, very well written and it's very good. But it was so good that I actually did research on the actual Arctic expeditions that it was based off of because I was so fascinated by what these guys had to endure.
Hmm.
Um, but that's an interesting horror because it encompasses like the book encompasses a sort of a supernatural element with like this creature that's kind of like a bear, like a polar bear yeti kind of crossover that's stalking this Arctic crew while they're stuck in ice.
Mm,
So you're dealing with that, but then you also have the horror of men turning against each other as your food sources are dwindling and different illnesses are taking over, like
mm.
scurvy and all this stuff because they're malnourished. Along with just dealing with the elements themselves in the Arctic. So fucking great novel, and they did a wonderful TV adaptation of it
Yeah,
too.
I saw that.
That's one of my favorite horror season, like horror shows, like season
Mm,
of television. So good.
The
Um,
Terror.
the Terror. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to television shows. I only have a few because I just couldn't remember too many. And two of them are from when I was a child, which is Goosebumps, because
Mm-hmm.
those were great. And
Those
they were
were.
like kind of scary, but kind of fun. And then Tales from the Crypt, which I thought were
Oh
very scary
yeah.
when I was a child. Because I grew up Christian and I used to believe in like ghosts and spirits and things like that. So it took quite a while for me to kind of not be so afraid of those things. And so Tales from the Crypt and, evil and devils and
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff, I remember being pretty scary. Um, and then the other one, I'm hesitant to put it in the genre, but because I couldn't think of too many other ones, is The Walking Dead. There are some actual parts
Yeah,
in the
it's
movie,
considered a
especially at
horror.
the
Yeah.
kind of the beginning when they're first starting to deal with zombies, where they're kind of coming out of places and there's tons of them, and there's some jump scares and stuff. So I put that in there. Zombies are a horror um, aesthetic item, but they're not super scary to me. So I only sometimes think they're very scary. So
I think it's just
I put
because
that in
they're
there.
so oversaturated, And like with Walking
Well, they're
Dead, I
slow.
remember like the first season of Walking Dead's great, and there
Hmm.
it is more of a horror show. But then
Yeah.
10 seasons later, it's like you already know that they can just stab him in the head and pull the knife out and move on with their
Yeah.
lives. It's not a
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah. They're not as scary going forward, but I think
Mm.
it's part of that genre for a lot of people. So I just put it in there.
Yeah, yeah, zombies
Um,
are a huge
I'm
thing.
sure there's other ones like Buffy the Vampire Slayer it has vampires, so it's horror, but it's not scary
Yeah,
at all. Um,
it's like a
I'm
different level of
yeah,
horror. It's like a teen drama horror kind of
yeah,
mixture with vampires.
yeah.
Did you ever
Um,
watch it might have been like probably after you were probably too old by the time it really started, but Nickelodeon had this great show called Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I never
Where it's
got
like
into
about
that.
this like group of like young, or like I guess they were teenagers, preteen kids that like would gather around a campfire every night. They'd sneak out of their houses, and then like each episode was one of them telling a horror story. But
Hmm.
it was kind of like Goosebumps, where it was like, it's scary for kids, but it's
Yeah.
sort of like a fun scary. It's
Yeah.
not obviously too dark or too violent or anything like
Yeah.
that.
Nobody's
And
getting.
I remember loving it as a kid. And we recently subscribed to Paramount Plus, and they have it on there because they have the whole Nickelodeon catalog. And Vanessa and I were watching some episodes of it, and it's so bad now. Like when you watch it, it's so cheesy. But I
Mhm.
just remember really enjoying that show when I was a kid. But Tales from the Crypt is fucking gold. Like that stands up even to today. Like that's a show
Yeah.
that
Right.
Vanessa and I
It's
every once
fun.
in a while will just go through and watch all the seasons of it because
Mm,
it's
cool.
just so entertaining. I love anthology horror stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
And that narrator skeleton dude is
oh
like
yeah, the Crypt
super
Keeper,
fun.
he's fucking
Yeah.
priceless.
Yeah.
Um,
Cool.
and then I mean, in the same vein as Tales from the Crypt, there was Masters of Horror that ran for a few seasons in the early 2000s, which kind of picked up where Tales from the Crypt left off,
Mm.
which was really good. And then you have Creep Show, which is actually on Shutter right now. Similar, they even have a character that's sort of like the Crypt Keeper. He's like this zombie looking dude in a robe. Those are That's a solid horror show as well. But other than that, there's a anthology. It was like 3 or 4 seasons, and I think I was canceled. And it actually is pretty contemporary. Is It's called Channel Zero. It ran on Sci-Fi. But like the first season in particular, called Candle Cove, fucking great, so good.
Mm.
Um, and I'm trying to think other horror, the Terror, which we already kind of mentioned with the book, but that's like a great season of TV show that's like
Mm.
horror, like that historical horror. Trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, there's been some other stuff like Ash vs Evil Dead, which is like a sequel to which those aren't really scary so much as they are just like a fun slapstick horror. Like
Yeah.
it's more, the horror I think stems more from just like the absurd amount of violence than it is anything else.
Yeah.
There's not
It's
really
it's
any
not
sense of
realistic
dread.
enough to be
Yeah.
scary. Yeah.
It's just scary because it's demons and lots of blood and violence. So I think for some people that's scary, but for me, it's just entertaining. I enjoy Evil Dead and Army of Darkness and all that.
All right.
But maybe we probably move on from there. I can't really think of. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's
And there's
plenty more
millions
TV
of,
shows,
yeah.
but
And there's, stuff on for television that's like real, like true crime shit,
mhm.
which is real scary to
That
me.
stuff
I
is,
don't want to
yeah. When
watch
you're
that at
watching,
all.
yeah, like documentaries on Netflix about serial killers and stuff, that
Yeah.
stuff is like scarier to me.
Yeah.
You know what used to scare me all the time as a kid too is Unsolved Mysteries. That
Yeah.
fucking
That
theme
was a very
song,
scary show.
yeah. And it's because it's all
Because
based
they
off
were
of
all,
like real things
yeah, or
that
there
they
was like
didn't figure out.
America's Most Wanted. That was a
Yeah.
fucking freaky show because all those people were still out in the world, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm gonna catch that person. No, they're gonna kill me. Um, so let's move on to movies. Obviously, the biggest category. So we just, we'll try to be reasonable with our time here. But I'm going to go through some that I think are like, because I don't go out of my way to see horror movies
hmm
specifically, but there are some that I've definitely ended up seeing, or a couple that I saw when I was young. And there was a time when I like enjoyed that kind of like I'm not supposed to watch it, so I'm going to go see it anyway because
hmm
it's rated R, and it's like people have talked about how gruesome and gory it is, so I'll go see it for that reason. So the first one I have on my list is a movie called Frailty, which is probably had the biggest like it was one of the movies where by the end of it I was like, actually, because I think at the time I was still kind of believing in certain Christian myths, like that God could come down and talk to you, and that um uh that I don't know, it just like, because of my Christian background and because of the Christian nature of that movie, it like was like, oh my God, this could be how real life is. Like really, there could be a person who's doing these things. Do you remember that one? It's I think it's Bill Pullman. It's one of those
Bill
guys.
Paxton, yeah.
Bill Paxton, and he's a father of two young boys, and one day he builds underground bunker, and then he starts to take random people into the bunker and killing them.
Mhm.
And he tells his kids that he's been given a list from God, and these are evil people who need to die. And one of the boys believes him, and one of the boys doesn't. And then it goes from there. Well, that's kind of a lot of it, but by the end of it, when you find out kind of the twist and you find out what's really going on, I remember being like, oh my God, this is like very, very scary. Do you remember that movie?
Yes, I was just verifying it was Bill,
Yeah,
because I was thinking Matthew McConaughey, and that's because he's also in it, but he's
he
one of
is
the
in it.
sons
Yeah,
as an
he is.
adult or
Yep,
whatever. But so it is, but Bill Paxton is the dad. That's right.
yep,
I That was what was mixing me up. I was like, I'm pretty sure Matthew McConaughey's in that movie. Was he the dad? And
yep.
we're just getting it wrong. But so
Well,
I
and I
was
don't
just double
remember who the
checking.
other kid is, but it shows them both, the kids as adults, but then it also goes in the past mostly. That's a good one. And then another one that's kind of similar to that in that it's kind of had a kind of like, I had to question my beliefs in Christian myths, which was Fallen with Denzel Washington, where he witnesses a execution, and it's of this horrible evil guy, and that guy's soul goes into people,
Mhm.
and then he figures it out, and he figures out that this guy can travel from person to person, and that person just is haunting him like through these other people. And the way that it's filmed and directed, and I think Denzel Washington did a really good job in it. And then by the end, Denzel Washington, the guy ends up, the only way to solve the problem is to get the demon, to go into Denzel Washington and to kill himself.
Mhm.
But then he has to be far enough away from any living other thing so that it doesn't go into them.
Mhm.
Or else, because if it has nowhere to go, then it'll like disappear. I remember that being super scary. Have you ever seen that movie?
I've never seen it, but
Fallen.
the plot sort of reminds me of a movie from the 80s called Shocker, where this serial killer gets executed in an electric chair. And he does some kind of like ritual before he's executed in his prison cell, and allows his like spirit to travel through electricity. So he like travels into other bodies, and then like once like they're kind of used up, he moves to like the next body. And then
Mm,
the whole movie is about this young kid who has like a tie to him, like a family tie,
mm,
like chasing out. Anyway, it's like a kind of like a less serious. It's probably not as serious as Fallen. It's kind of like a
mm-hmm.
goofy 80s horror movie in a way. There's like a weird sort of vibe to it, but it's similar only in that the spirit body hops around. Great movie though. If you're a fan. I think it's Wes Craven that did that one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just looked at it. It looks pretty silly. Um, with
It's
the
pretty violent and
80s
like
stuff.
in
Yeah.
dark. It
Oh,
has a
yeah.
very interesting tone to it, but then there's like this sort of like underlying goofiness to it that stops it from going too dark.
Yeah. Next one on my list is Candyman, not the one that they're making now, but the one that originally came out. I remember I was like 10 or 11 or something, and I was at some person's house, like a friend of a friend from elementary school, and they just let their kids do whatever they wanted, and there were no parents around, and we were all like just hanging out at their house. I might have been older than that. I might have been like 13. And it was super late at night. And I feel like there was a party going on, and there was a bunch of people there. And all I could do was just watch this fucking scary Candyman movie about the guy with the hook.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just being like, that's real. If I say Candyman in the mirror a bunch of times, I'm going to die. And this is the most horrifying thing I've ever heard of. And the tone of the movie is just fucking dark and
Mm-hmm.
creepy.
Yeah, we just
Um,
watched that recently because we watched the original and then we watched the new one, which the new
yeah.
one's really good too. The
Is
new
it?
one's like a sequel to
Oh, yeah. Because
the
there was a
original.
Candyman too.
Yeah, they did like 4 or 5 of them, I think.
Yeah.
But this one just follows the events from the first one. So it's like you could watch the first one and then this new one. And that's
Oh,
like you
okay.
don't need to watch any of the other sequels.
Nice.
They've been doing that a lot with horror movies lately. Halloween did the same thing where they sort of ignored
Yeah.
all the sequels to Halloween. So it's just the original Halloween and then the new ones that they're that are coming out right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Nice. So
what's
you'd
interesting about
recommend the new
Candyman
one?
is, huh?
You'd recommend the new one?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I think if you enjoyed sort of the idea of the first one, the new one's really good too, because it sort of follows that one, and they talk about the events from the first one and how the myth changes over time, because they reference the first movie, but they are recounting the events a little incorrectly, because you know how like as word of mouth continues, like the story sort of distorts as the more people it passes through. So it's an interesting idea of looking at like urban myths, um, and also having some freaky ass shit happening too.
Yeah.
But I never knew I didn't watch Candyman until I was an adult. It's just one of those movies I missed growing up. But for when I was a kid, it was always Bloody Mary was the one that you said like
Yep.
3 times in the dark in the mirror. So when I was watching Candyman, I was like, oh, there's
Just a take on
it's
that.
like the same thing, I guess, but just a different person.
Yeah, I remember my mom told me about Bloody Mary, and that freaked me the fuck out. Somebody told me about it. I think it was my mom, and I was just like, "Oh, that's horrifying. I'm not going to do that." And I'm pretty sure I did that. And I'm pretty sure immediately after watching Candyman, me and like 2 other guys went into the bathroom and fucking did it, and it didn't happen. And we were like, "Ah!" and ran out and shit.
It's just that fear of like, if it does work,
it's a curse word. It's like a cursed thing to do, and if you say something, it's superstition. Like.
Well, it's like that logic,
large.
like logically you're like, this isn't gonna work, because
exactly. So
like there would be like a big PSA about never doing that. There'd be an investigation
that'd be a fun movie. It's actually true, and everyone knows about it, and people still do it for some reason, and you're like everybody, can you stop saying Candyman? He keeps on going these fucking rampages, kills about 10 people and then disappears. We need you to stop saying it in the mirror because you're causing some ruckus here.
Well, and you'd have like these spiritualists trying to investigate and figure out how to end this curse and this problem.
It'd be like a whole like a ghost hunter show, but it's just they try to get someone else to say it so they can like figure out how to stop it. I don't know, but they just die.
Reminds me, there's a novel called Hex by Thomas Old Huvelt, and the whole book takes place in this town where this witch was executed like hundreds of years ago, but she still is in the town. She's like, they have her mouth sewn shut because they talk about like a big thing is if anybody breaks the sewing on her mouth, then she'll be able to recite her spells and like curse the town and all this. But she's still like, she's cursed to wander the town. So they have like the security system set up so they can keep track of where she is in the town. And then like, she just pops up in people's houses randomly. So they have to report the sightings. It's a really fascinating book about
she can't do anything until they do that. So she's just trying to get them to do that.
Yeah, she doesn't do anything. Like they talk about how like when she shows up in houses, like people will just like put a coat over her so that they don't have to look at her.
It's like
creepy.
Scary.
That's
like, very scary.
Yeah, it's a great horror novel. I recommend people read. It came out like I don't know, like 5 or 6 years ago. It's from I want to say he's Swedish, the writer. I don't know. It was translated to English like 4 or 5 years ago. It was a great horror novel where you're just like, it's such an interesting idea too, that there's nobody that can disprove that the witch exists because she's just in the fucking town, and they have like this whole system with trying to deal with her, and they just live their lives while this fucking old witch just shows up in random places.
Yeah.
And just hangs out, doesn't do anything.
That's creepy. Anyway. We already talked about Silence of the Lambs. That's a good one. Yeah. It's scary. I think the scariest part's when he takes the face and puts it on his face, and you're like, well, that's pretty creepy.
It's kind of in the vein of like Seven, like the just this like crime thriller,
creepy
horror
serial killer.
Yeah.
Well, I did find Red Dragon be pretty creepy. I
don't know if I
don't know if I ever watched Hannibal, which was that the second one or the third one?
Yeah, Hannibal was like the fall, because Red Dragon's technically a prequel to all of them, and then it would be Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, and then Hannibal is the third one. I guess.
I know, but when did they come out?
It came out after Silence of the Lambs. It was the second one, and then Red Dragon came out after that. But that was the prequel. But yeah, as far as release date, it was the second one.
Red Dragon was.
Hannibal was.
Oh, see, I never saw Hannibal, but because I was kind of like,
Dragon
I don't really
was
care.
Like the third one, basically.
But for some reason, I ended up watching Red Dragon with I think it's Ralph Fiennes.
Edward Norton.
Edward Norton.
Mm-hmm. He's the FBI agent or the.
I know, but who plays Red Dragon?
Oh, I think it is Ralph How do you pronounce his last name?
I
Is it
think it's
Fiennes?
Ray Fiennes.
I think it's Ralph.
Ralph?
I
I don't think
think.
it's Ralph.
Yeah.
I think it's Reif. But I could be wrong. Let's look it up.
Red Dragon.
Yeah, it is him, the guy who plays Voldemort. But let's find out how to spell his name. And I remember I was like really enamored with that tattoo on his back. And then later on, everyone was like, "Hey, do you want to get a tattoo?" And I was like, "I want to get a big dragon on my back, but it
Yeah, it
wouldn't
is
be like a
Ralph.
scary dragon. It would be like a
Ralph
fun dragon."
Fiennes.
I think
Fiennes. I
it's
don't know how.
Fines.
I think it's Fiennes. Ralph and then
Oh, it is Ralph.
Fiennes. Yeah.
Maybe I heard somebody trying to be fancy and pronouncing it like on a
Oh,
TV show or something,
maybe.
and I just adopted it. Maybe he's so scary I don't want to say his name right. That's a good one. And then another one is Dog Soldiers. Have you ever seen that? It's
Oh
a
yeah, I actually watched that movie
obscure
on your recommendation like years ago because you were the one who
I
recommended
recommend
it,
it.
and I hadn't just never seen it, and I watched. I think I actually borrowed the DVD from you. I'm pretty sure.
Love that movie, and I know that nobody knows about it, and I know that like
It's a
it's
great
not easy to
werewolf movie.
find.
Yeah.
But as far as yeah, like werewolf, military, weird but well done. I watched that when I was like, actually, I remember me and this guy in high school. We were probably 16, 17, and we were trying to hook up with these two girls. And we went over to one of their houses when nobody was home. And all four of us like watched Dog Soldiers with these two girls. And like, there's no way they enjoyed that movie. But I was like, dude, this is fucking awesome. And then we ended up like hooking up with them. And I remember it was like one of the only like one night stand situations I ever got into. And it was like a super I felt super cool about it. Anyway, that's
So Dog Soldiers has a special place in
it
your
does.
heart because
Maybe
it
that's
got
why I
you
like
a
it so
one night
much.
stand. Yeah.
Somehow it's related to this
Well, yeah, it's tied to
sexual
that event.
experience. And that was weird. But anyway, that's a great movie.
Well, what's cool about Dog Soldiers too is there's very few like good werewolf movies that have like cool werewolf effects that are practical and interesting. But what's interesting about that story too is that it's one of the cases where the main cast of characters aren't like everyday people or helpless people. Like they're soldiers.
Yeah, and they're gonna fight.
And then they get fucked up by these werewolves. So it's like it creates this extra sense of foreboding when you're like, man, even these trained military people cannot stand up against this force. It's one thing if it's just like a family in a cabin and then a werewolf attacks them. It's like, they're probably don't know how to defend themselves.
Yeah.
But when it's a whole platoon of like trained military men that are still getting their asses kicked.
And I think the actors, the military guys do such a good job of like being a squad and being realistic and then caring about each other and sacrificing themselves and stuff like that. It just makes the whole thing like a really good standoff movie. And then my last one I have here, and I'm sure I could come up with more because I'm sure I've seen more, but the last one I have here is Rob Zombie's The Devil's Rejects, which I thought was creepy because of obviously the fucking creepy ass characters. But like there's a scene where the girl tortures someone in a hotel room, and I thought that was just like really, really creepy. All the characters are just so into they're so sadistic that it made me kind of scared. Oh, sorry, that isn't the last one. The last one is Hostel, which is similar.
I was thinking about that when you were talking about torture. I was like, that's kind of like the torture porn genre of horror.
Yeah, I remember Hostel being that one of the first movies I saw that was like torture porn or like Eli Roth, like over the top, gory, and all about like imagining people getting hurt, and that's what's scary. And
people paying to do it.
Yeah,
like they want to participate
for sure.
Did you ever watch Cabin Fever?
Yeah,
Eli Roth did that one before Hostel. That was like a really violent. That movie's.
Oh wait, no, I'm thinking of. Is it just called The Cabin? I don't know if I've seen Cabin Fever.
Well, Cabin Fever is like the group of college friends that go to the cabin, and then They all start falling prey to this like skin eating disease, basically.
Oh, I have seen that.
And it was like the first movie that Eli Roth directed it, and then like it got like kind of
Yeah,
gave
that
him.
sounds really familiar. And they all start getting sick, and then the
Yeah, because
water's
you
messed
find,
up
yeah,
or
you find out that
something.
it's in the wall because
Yeah,
like it gets in the water because a guy who's infected like falls into the water
yeah.
reservoir where they pull all the spring water from, and so like anybody that drinks water from it gets infected. um
Oh, it's Cabin in the Woods. That's the other one I was thinking
Now
of.
Cabin in the Woods is good
That's
too. That's a more like,
Sam Raimi.
it starts off as like a very traditional slasher type horror, but
Yeah,
then as it goes, you start to realize that they're playing into the tropes. That movie is a lot of fun and like a
yeah.
cool nod to
I
just like
liked it.
the
Yeah.
horror genre.
Oh, you know what's another good one is what is it? It's 13 Ghosts or something like
13
that.
Ghosts, that's a that one does
It's
not
like
hold up so
silly. It's
well.
very
Yeah,
silly.
I
But I
remember
remember
it
being like,
creeped.
"Oh, this is a good creepy concept."
No, yeah, where they have to trap the ghosts to like, I don't
Yeah.
remember the exact plot, but that movie like I found it scary when I was like a teenager when it
Yeah.
first came out. But when I
Yeah.
watch it now, I'm like, oh, this is kind of hokey, and but it's like still fun to watch.
Yeah.
There's a lot of horror like that where it's like you know it's kind of silly and hokey, I guess, but there's
Yeah.
just like an entertainment value to it that you can't help. Um, but
Yeah.
is that
I think
the end
that's
of
the
your list?
list.
Oh
So yeah,
man.
The Devil's Rejects was the last one. And then Hostel.
Hmm.
Those are kind of similar in there. They're just like scary, realistic people. Like people
Hmm.
who this could all be real and it's all very fucking horrifying. Um and spooky. What about you?
Well, my
Any
list would be like 1,000
thousand?
miles
But
long,
let's
probably.
like
But
what's
no,
like
so
not just
like,
we don't want to just list
yeah,
horror
list names.
things. What's
Yeah.
like a good like a really
So
like you'd recommend?
the big one that always has stood out to me, and it's more because it's tied into it being, it's the only movie one, or it's actually one of two movies that I remember I was like so scared of it as a kid that I literally couldn't. I had to look away from the screen because I was so scared, and I had nightmares about it later. And the first one is Pet Cemetery. I watched
Oh,
that movie
sure,
when
the
I was like
movie.
6. Yeah. And what scared me in that movie was the ghost of Pascal, because he shows up in their bedroom and his fucking head's all fucked up, his brain's exposed because he, was in that accident and he was hit by, I think, a truck. And it just, his image and like his presence was so, it just terrified me as a kid. And so like that's a movie I still enjoy to this day. And like I said, it's like one of my favorite horror novels also. But the movie is just, it holds up. And every time I see Pascal, it just reminds me of when I was that 6-year-old kid and I had to like look away because I was so terrified. And then I had nightmares about him later
Oh
one,
yeah.
that night. And then the other movie is like a mid-90s sci-fi horror movie called Event Horizon.
Oh, that's a good movie. Yeah, I
And
remember that
that
one.
movie scared me because I got scared of Sam Neill's character towards the end when he's like running around naked, but he's like all cut up and like fucked up looking. And that just like
Yeah.
terrified me when I was a kid too. Um, and there's a scene where like they're watching the video log of the prior crew. And then there's a scene where this guy has like no eyes and he's just chanting something in like another language. And
Yeah.
anyway, there's just like, they're just like these standout moments that their imagery was so scary to me as a kid. So those are two
Yeah.
that sort of stick out for me. Um, and then I mean, but I just enjoy horror movies. Like
Yeah.
they're the movies that like Vanessa and I will just go to when we were going to the theater before the pandemic, we still haven't gone back yet.
Hmm.
But it was like anytime there's like a horror movie, we'd almost for sure just go watch that movie at the theater because she's also just a huge horror movie fan. Like
Yeah.
we watch like horror movies constantly. And but I mean, as far as ones that I think really stand out, at least recently, would be like It Follows, which came out like 5 or 6 years ago. That's a great sort of analogy for sexually transmitted infections, like because the idea is that this creature, which part of what makes that movie so scary is that you don't know the origin of the creature, you don't know what it wants, and basically what it does is it constantly follows whoever it's after, and the only way to pass it off is to have sex with somebody. So then when you have sex with somebody, then that becomes like the fixation of this thing.
Hmm.
And the interesting thing is it never looks the same. It looks like a different person every time you see it. And all
Mm.
you do is you just see it walking towards you. So it's always coming towards you, and
What
it
if you
has a
stop?
different
It
face every
just never
time.
gets to you?
No, when it catches up to you, you die. And then it
Oh,
goes,
okay. Well,
and
that's
then it goes
fucking
back to
that'll
the
do it.
prior person. So like
But at
if it
some
was,
point, like at some point, there's nobody
well, I
there
guess eventually there would be nobody for it to go back
because
to.
they would either be dead or they would like.
But think about how many people would have to die in order for, for it to get
It's hard.
anyway.
Like,
But
how does something like that get started
that's what
though?
I mean. That's what's so
Yeah, it doesn't really
fascinating
make any
about it.
sense. Yeah,
Because you're like, what is the creature? What is it?
yeah,
A ghost? Is it a demon? Like, what the
yeah,
fuck is
yeah.
it? What
It's
does it
just an
want?
STD. It's just herpes.
You should watch it. It's good.
Oh, I'm
It's got some
scared.
really great
It's
like
gonna
jump
make me
scares in it.
more afraid of sex.
And it's so eerie because like the person who is infected, I guess, is like they have to keep asking their friends if they see the person in the distance. Like if they see somebody walking in their direction, they have to be like, "Do you guys see that woman over there? Like, or
Yeah,
is
they
that
don't
it?"
know, is it? Yeah.
Like, because you just
But how do you
never
know that it's
know.
bad? Because you wouldn't just like if somebody's walking toward you, you wouldn't go, "Oh, that thing's going to try to kill me." You just go, "Oh, what are you doing?" And then you would
Mhm.
die.
Yeah.
So how does anyone not
'Cause-
do that?
Well, it's
Is it scary enough that you don't want it
yeah,
to get
you
near
sort
you?
of like can recognize that it's not right. Like
Oh, okay.
there's like an sort of an emptiness in its face as it's coming towards you. And
I'd
but
have a hard
like
time.
the characters in the movie are it's like a follows a group of friends, and so nobody else can see it at all except for the person infected, but it
Yeah.
can still interact with other people. So there's like a great scene on like a beach where it's coming towards the main character, and like and she's trying to point out where it is, and the other friends are trying to stop it, and it just like throws them
Oh, they're
off.
trying
And
to
like,
help.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
it's a
wow.
really good movie. But part of what's so scary about it is that you at no point in the movie they define what it is or where it comes from. It just is, and it's like a thing that they just have to deal with.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so and that's what I love about horror. Like I was saying earlier, the moment that you define
Hmm.
the evil, the ghost, what it wants, like the whatever's going on, like the horror just diminishes completely because then it's a known quantity at that point. But if there's a way that like horror can sort of maintain a level of mystery around whatever the darkness or entity is, like it sort of remains a little scary to
Mm,
me, at least to me.
sure.
And another great example is a movie we actually just watched recently that actually just came out called The Night House, which is a fantastic sort of haunted house movie about this woman who is in a seemingly happy marriage with her husband, and her husband just goes out in their boat one day and shoots himself in the middle of the lake at their
Mm.
house.
Yeah, I've
And
heard of that.
so, yeah, and so the movie takes place like direct, like a few days after his suicide, and she's back home. So a lot of it's like dealing with grief, but then she starts kind of uncovering things about him that she didn't know when he was alive.
Mm.
And she's trying to, and there's like a spirit or something sort of haunting their house that she doesn't know if it's her husband's ghost or if it's something else. It's a great movie though. It's one of those horror movies. It's not like violent or anything. It's just has a great atmosphere and like interesting characters. And a great mystery about like who her husband really was, or was he,
Mm.
everything
Why did
he
he kill
appeared to be
himself?
kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Hmm.
Um,
Nice.
trying to think. There's just so
There's
many.
like like Texas Chainsaw and
Yeah,
there's
there's those classic
the
Friday the 13th,
Friday the
Child's
13th.
Play,
Yeah.
Halloween. I
What is
mean,
that? The Hills Have
Hills
Eyes.
Have Eyes, which I like the
Um,
remake a lot. I there's some of these
I think I
movies I
watched the
prefer the
remake.
remakes over the originals, which
Yeah.
I think is more of a generational thing. I think people who watched the original Hills Have Eyes in the late 70s, I think it came out,
Hmm.
maybe early 80s, but I'm sure that they probably prefer that version over the one that came out in the early 2000s. But people from like our generation and
Yeah.
younger, it's like they're going to gravitate towards the probably the newer version.
Well,
Um,
it probably has better graphics and
yeah, visually. And
better effects.
I think that storytelling in movies has also gotten better over time. Like we just have developed a better way of communicating what's happening in a story. Sometimes when you watch an older movie, um, it's like I feel like I almost have to like pay more attention because I can't. It's easy to lose track of sort of what's going
Hmm.
on because the storytelling methods, even 40,
Well,
50
yeah,
years ago were so different than they are
sure.
now.
Well, we have so many, ex, different technologies and people have experimented with, different different cinematography, really.
Well, a great example actually, that we just watched actually, and I don't know if you've had the chance, is the new Dune that just came out. It
No,
just
and
hit
if you tell
HBO
me
Max.
anything about it, I'll kill you.
Okay,
I'm gonna
so
watch
all
it
I'll say is,
after this.
have you watched the original movie that David
I
Lynch
watched
did?
a documentary on it. I didn't
Oh,
watch the
okay.
whole thing, but I know enough about it to get an idea of like what it looked like for sure.
So like so we watched the original Dune because Vanessa and I had neither of us had seen it. I've attempted to read the book a few times, but I have never been able to finish it. So we watched the original David Lynch Dune. That movie is hokey and
I know that's
fucking
what
weird. It's
killed
just
it. Yeah.
it's so like obviously they didn't have the technology back then. So there's a lot of things that just look hokey.
Yeah.
And then there's just that movie relies a lot on like these internal monologues the characters have.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of scenes where you're just hearing characters' thoughts and they're
Yeah.
like exposition dumps trying to
Yeah.
explain all the
It's too
lore and the
difficult. Yeah.
language and all this shit to you through their thinking.
Hmm.
And it just doesn't work. I'm like, what the fuck is
Yeah.
going on in this movie? Like, this is, and the villain's fucking hilarious. It's just like a fat floating
I
guy
know.
with
Yeah.
blisters on his face. And,
Harkonnen. Yeah.
so but there's a weird charm to it. Like I could see why people like it, but as I'm watching, I'm like, I can't handle it. Like
Yeah.
this is turning me off from even wanting to watch the new Dune, because if this is like any indication of what this story is about and like
Yeah.
what the lore is, like it's fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
So we watched that one and I was like, oh, whatever. And then we watched the new one, and it's interesting because the new one's similar. There's like scenes that are very almost like word for word the same dialogue and everything.
Oh.
But the presentation is fucking way better. The
I would imagine.
cinematography is
Yeah.
amazing, and and there's no internal monologues. They find a really brilliant way of just telling you about the world by you just being there and
Yeah.
listening
That's
to people
important.
talk. And
Yeah.
the other benefit is, which is interesting because they don't market it this way. This is only the first part, so it
Oh,
only
I
covers
know.
half the novel.
Well, it says one of
But
the taglines is the epic journey begins.
yeah,
So
well,
they're obviously going to do more.
but what's funny is like in like the movie posters and all, and the clip art and all this stuff for the movie,
Yeah.
it just says Dune.
Yeah.
But then when
Yeah.
you're watching it, when the title credit comes up, it says Dune Part 1. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why did you not put that like on the movie poster?
Yeah, I
That's
don't know.
probably a little confusing and maybe misleading for some people, because the movie is the same length as the David Lynch one, but the David Lynch one, I guess, covers the whole first novel. It just
Yeah.
moves at a really breakneck pace to do so.
Yeah, that first
Whereas
novel is
this
so
one,
huge.
yeah, and so this one, it's like it's still 2.5 hours, but it's only half the novel.
Yeah.
So I think they're able to take their time.
Mhm.
They slow it down a little bit, but just the way that storytelling has evolved over the years is
Yeah.
just really fascinating in movies. Like it basically took me from being not interested in Dune and its world and lore at all from the David Lynch movie. I was just kind of chuckling my way through that hilarious movie.
Yeah.
To being like, holy shit, I'm really fascinated by all this now, because it's just presented in such a better way. And
Yeah.
I can't wait to see, the next part. And it actually kind of makes me want to go back and read the book, because now I'm like, now I have like a better understanding of the world. So now
Sure.
when I'm reading all this jargon in the novel, it'll like, I have more things to connect it to.
Sure.
Because Dune's one of those things, which a lot of sci-fi and fantasy is guilty of this, of just having absurd names for all this random stuff that they have to make up. And so sometimes when you're reading it, you're just like, what's going on? Like a whole bunch of pronouns were just thrown at me and I have no fucking idea what any of this means. It's just names that I can't pronounce and all this stuff. But I had the same problem with Game of Thrones. Like at first, Game of Thrones is so confusing. There's so many characters and names and all this stuff going on. But it's like if you can sit through it, like, and you start to parse out who is who and who's what family and house and all this random shit, it gets easier. But has nothing to do with horror anyway.
No, but I think it's a good way to end because we're getting on, and I actually want to go see the movie at 2, and it's 1:20, so I kind of want to get going.
Oh, are you gonna go to the theater and go check it out?
Yeah, I want to go watch it
nice.
because I don't have HBO Max, but
Okay.
I have to watch it. I'm hanging out with a guy tomorrow who is the biggest Dune fan I know. He's listened to the audiobooks like 4 times each, like each book. He just goes through them over and over and over. He's not like, you wouldn't look at this guy and go, he's probably a Dune nerd. He's like, he's in law enforcement, and like he's like a doodly dude, but he is a Dune nerd, and I very much enjoy talking to him. He got me into the books and stuff. But
Fascinating
I
how like somebody can like really gets into something. I feel like for
yeah,
you, it's like the Souls games. Like you just
yeah,
there's
I'm
something
very
about them that
much in
just
it. There
fucking works
is,
for
yeah,
you on every level.
yeah.
And so Dune is that for him.
Yep. So I'm going to go watch that, and maybe we can chat about that next time. And I do recommend the books. I actually have the review on my website of all the books that I've read so far, which is almost all of them. I'm up to, yeah, I have one book left, Chapter House Dune, that I haven't read, but I've read everything up to that.
Mhm.
And I have a review for each one, as well as a review for Anathema, if anybody wants to read that.
There you go.
And I just did the review of the 5th season, which is my recommendation for the evening. What is yours?
So I'll make this quick and snappy so you can get going. I will just recommend Pet Cemetery, as in
Yeah, I
all
might go
forms
see
of
that,
it.
or I might
I would
watch that.
recommend people read the novel and then watch both movies because they had the original movie from the early 90s, I think, which is that's a faithful, more faithful adaptation of the novel. Then they had a new movie come out a couple of years ago, 2019, called Pet Cemetery, and it's like a remake, but they actually change a core element of the story, so it diverts considerably from like the novel and the other movie, and it's an
Mm,
interesting like interpretation. I don't think it's quite as good as the original movie or the book, but it's like a cool idea of like what if this happened instead, and then follows that thread. So people haven't invested any time in that story, and you want like a good spooky Halloween thing. It's one of the
nice.
better horror stories out there.
Cool.
I'm actually
Yeah.
listening to the audiobook right now. I'm almost done with it. And then I'm probably gonna rewatch the
Watch
new
this
one.
stuff.
I just watched the old version, the old movie not that long ago. So I'll probably watch the more recent one again after I'm done with the audiobook. But there we go. That's my recommendation.
Cool. So have a good Halloween, everybody. And make sure to tell us what your favorite horror. I was going to say Halloween. Favorite horror genre movies, TV, video games, and books are. You can go to the Facebook page. You can comment on the YouTube version of this, or you can find me on Twitter or Instagram. Channing's on Twitter and Instagram, although I don't see you on
Yeah.
Instagram very often.
I
Um,
I don't know. I just check it every once in a while because I have family and friends on there. So it's like
yeah,
I'll peek in every once in a while to see what people that I know are up to, but I
yeah.
don't really use it.
Go to joesnotesblog.com for the show notes and the links to all of the different ways to get a hold of us. And let us know if we missed any major awesome
Oh, we
horror
did.
flicks. I
We did
know,
for
I'm
sure.
sure.
I was gonna say, especially
There's
with
no
the
way we
horror
didn't.
movies, there's just so many
Yeah,
of them that, and so I was just trying to think of stuff that like came to mind right away.
sure.
So,
And we can chat more about that and all everything next time.
mhm.
All right. Thank you very much.
Doodaloo.